My name is Adeline, 35 years old, living in a small town in Western Oregon, where people still call each other by name but rarely call out the wounds left unhealed. That afternoon, I brought a birthday cake to my former father-in-law's house. Walter, the man the entire town believed had been in a vegetative state for nearly 2 years. But when I opened the door, the house was eerily silent. On the dining table, there was only a cold slice of pizza, and his eyes, wide open, locked on mine, alert, full of meaning. Then his lips moved and he spoke each word clearly. Get the key. Have you ever been the only one who stayed while everyone else walked away like you were invisible? If this story touches something in your heart, leave a comment, tap like and subscribe to the channel. Because what I found behind that door changed my entire life. And you won't believe what happened next. 4 years ago, the sky was just as gray. I still remember the cold scent of incense in the breeze, the sound of rain tapping on the black umbrellas, and my hand gripping the photo of the only man who ever chose me as family. Michael, my husband, died in a car crash one foggy night on his way home from a late shift. They said he had fallen asleep at the wheel. I never blamed him. People can't control when exhaustion hits, but others were very good at controlling how much pain I was allowed to feel. Michael's funeral was the day I lost my husband, and also the moment I realized I was no longer part of his family. After the casket was lowered, Nancy, my mother-in-law, stood in front of me at the cemetery, not even lowering her voice though others were still around. I think you should start putting your life back together, Adeline. There's nothing tying you to us anymore. I looked at her, trying to see if there was any hint of grief in her eyes. But no. Just a tired coldness, like I was a smudge on an old will. Logan, Michael's younger brother, stood behind her, still holding a to-go coffee, eyes glued to his phone. No one said anything to me that entire afternoon, except for a few polite nods and a half-hearted hug from a neighbor or two. After the funeral, I moved into a small apartment on the south side of town, about a 30-minute drive from my in-laws' house. I didn't get dinner invitations anymore, no check-ins, not a single visit. But each month on the first Saturday I still came by, with groceries, some vitamins, and sometimes a book I thought Walter might like to hear me read. When Michael was alive, Walter was a strong, quiet man, never intrusive but always a steady presence in the background of our lives. After his stroke, it was like he drifted to another realm. No speaking, no movement, no clear response. The doctor called it a semi-coma, but Nancy preferred to call it the end. Walter's just an empty shell now, I once overheard her say to a nurse. Keeping him alive is just burning money. Even so, I still came. One time I brought a fish stew he once complimented years ago. I scooped out a spoonful, sat beside his bed and whispered, "If you can hear me, know that I haven't forgotten." Not ever. His eyes didn't blink, his hands didn't move, but I swear I saw a single tear roll down his cheek. Nancy started banning me from bringing food. He can't eat. It's wasteful. Logan kept leaving nursing home brochures in the nightstand drawer, like a silent warning. But I knew somehow Walter was still there. Hidden behind the silence, behind that distant stare, there was something that wasn't empty. One day I arrived earlier than usual. The air was turning cold. The front door was slightly open. I heard Nancy's voice from the kitchen. "If he dies this week, even better. Logan can close the deal on that lake house sooner." I didn't go in. I turned around, sat in my car and let the tears fall for 15 minutes. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't confront them. I'm not the kind of person who knows how to yell, and I had no one backing me up. But I knew I couldn't leave Walter behind. Not out of obligation, but because he was the only one left who truly saw me, not as a useless daughter-in-law, not as a widow in the way, but as a person. After Michael died, I used to sit for hours in our bedroom, touching every item he left behind, clinging to the bits of memory that remained. Some nights, I called his old number just to hear his voicemail greeting. At one point, only one message came through. From Walter. Just one sentence. "Be strong, sweetheart. I'm still here." I saved that message. Made it my lock screen. Every time I felt abandoned, I opened my phone. No one knew how I lived after Michael passed. No one cared. But Walter, he was different. And that's why when he said, "Get the key," I didn't feel fear. I felt hope. Hope that I wasn't wrong in believing he was still in there, still enduring in silence, still waiting for someone who hadn't walked away. I bent down, gently pulling the fabric under the armchair where he used to sit and read the paper. My hands trembled when they touched something cold and metallic. Just as he said. They old, tarnished but real. Walter didn't look at me, just blinked slowly, as if nodding with complete trust. What was hidden behind this wall of silence? How much had been buried beneath layers of time and pretense? I didn't know. But in that moment we were no longer alone. And I wasn't stepping back. Not this time. Not when he had finally reached out, even if only with his eyes. I clutched the old key in my palm, slick with sweat. It didn't match any door I'd seen in this house. Too small for the front door, too refined to be decorative. I looked up, met Walter's eyes. He said nothing, just glanced toward the end of the hallway, toward the study room door, always locked whenever I visited. I had once assumed it just stored old books, or memories Walter didn't want disturbed. I walked slowly, my shoes tapping softly on the wooden floor. My hand reached for the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned easily. Unlocked. Inside was a dusty room, the curtains half-drawn so weak sunlight spilled over shelves filled with old leather-bound papers. The air smelled of musty pages and the familiar scent of mint, Walter's old shaving lotion. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that my heart led me to a corner of the room where a worn brown leather couch sat. I knelt, reaching under a cushion, and just as he'd said, my fingers touched a faint dip in the fabric. I traced the seam. Something hard, protruding. A small latch. I pressed lightly. A soft click echoed. The wooden paneling behind the couch popped open, revealing a small hollow compartment. Inside was a heavy steel box. Not the kind with a traditional keyhole, but with a triple dial combination lock. The kind you use to hide things no one else should ever see. I placed the box on the table, my hands shaking slightly. Walter couldn't say the code aloud. But if he had planned this far ahead, surely he'd left a clue. I turned to the bookshelf. A row of journals, neatly arranged by color. Forest green, deep red, earthy brown. One had a slightly bent spine as if opened often. I pulled it down. Dust rose in a thin mist through the sunlight. Inside were jagged but legible scrawls, Walter's handwriting. Not from his healthy days but post-stroke. The letters were crooked, struggling, but determined. The first few lines tightened something in my chest. If someone is still turning these pages, they don't see me as broken. I took a deep breath and flipped to the fourth page. A set of numbers outlined in red. 07, 21, 64. I knew Walter's birthday was July 21st, 1964. I returned to the box and turned the dials. The clicks aligned, and the lid popped open like a long-held breath finally released. Inside were 3 items. A silver USB drive, a black leather notebook with hand-stitched trim, and a stack of documents tied with dark silk ribbon. The first page bore a handwritten title. Amendment of Trust, for eyes that still see me as human. I sat in silence. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I understood all too well. I picked up the notebook, opened to the first page. Scattered entries. Dates when Logan brought appraisers to the house. Notes about Nancy asking the doctor to increase his sedatives. Little messages to himself. Remember to hide a copy where she used to read. She's coming tomorrow. Don't lose faith in the only one still calling me Dad. And in the corner of one page, the shortest line, Adeline never left. I looked up, my vision blurring. I never thought my presence had meant that much. I always assumed I was just an outsider showing up out of guilt, out of habit. But no. I was the only one he trusted. I gently untied the silk ribbon, opening the folder. A revised will notarized 6 months ago with a clear signature and official seal. And on the very first page my heart clenched. My name is Walter H. Prescott. With a sound mind and of my own free will, I hereby declare that the sole person I entrust to inherit my entire estate and preserve my legacy is Adeline Grace Carter, the only one who still sees me as human. I placed my hand on the paper, my fingers trembling but steady. Every word pushed me forward, pulling me out of the dusty shadow of silence I had lived in for too long. I turned to look at Walter. He was still sitting there, his eyes watching me from the other room. I clutched the USB drive and the documents tightly to my chest like something sacred. There was no more doubt. I had been chosen, not because of blood, but because I didn't turn my back when everyone else did. And now, every secret was beginning to rise. Every shadow was starting to take form. And I saw the path I had never dared to walk. I sat in the corner of Walter's study, the soft yellow light from his old desk lamp casting a warm glow across my hands. That tiny silver USB rested in my palm, harmless in appearance, but I knew what it held could trigger an earthquake that would shake more than just this house. It could shatter the lies they had built their lives upon. Walter's old computer sat silently on the desk. I lifted the lid and dust rolled off like a thin veil. The screen booted up slowly, the blue background flickering after the rattling hum of the hard drive. When I inserted the USB, a folder popped up, recordings. No password. No encryption. Everything laid bare as if Walter knew I would be the one to find it. The one person he never needed to hide from. I clicked the first video labeled, Nancy _Logan living room 4-12. The screen lit up with a wide-angle view from a camera hidden behind the bookshelf. Nancy sat on the sofa, arms crossed, her eyes sharp as razors. Logan stood by the window, one hand holding a glass of wine, the other flipping through a file. "You should call the real estate agent," Nancy said coldly. "The house in Clear Lake could go for close to $3 million if we sell before winter." "His name's still on the deed," Logan replied flatly. "That's just on paper. He doesn't have a clue what he owns anymore." Nancy smirked, sipping her tea. "He can't even swallow a bowl of soup unless someone feeds him." My skin tightened, not from shock but from rage blooming silently in my chest. I skipped to the second video, Nancy _5-03. A young nurse stood awkwardly at the kitchen counter holding a medicine bottle. Nancy pointed straight at her, voice like a whip. "How many times do I have to say this? Do not lower the dosage. If he wakes up and starts asking questions, who do you think has to deal with that?" "Huh. But ma'am, the doctor." "I don't care what the doctor says." Nancy snapped, eyes blazing. "He's just a shell. Keeping him quiet is the only way. No one has to pretend to care." I turned the video off, my hand gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. I looked at Walter. He still sat in the doorway, thin light outlining the bones of his face. His gaze met mine, unblinking. No words needed. I understood his question. "Can you take this?" I nodded. I opened the next file. Logan _Hammergush _6-20. Logan wore a tracksuit, sitting in the garage with his feet propped on a toolbox, phone in hand. His voice rang out through the small speaker. "I'm telling you, Brody," Logan chuckled like he was talking about a bet. "If the old man kicks off soon, I'll get that lake house back and the old lady's gonna hand me half those antiques. That kind of payout doesn't come around often." I couldn't make out what the other person said, but Logan laughed again. "Don't worry. I've done the hard part. Adeline still comes around like some desperate stray." "Good. At least someone's mopping the floor." I swallowed hard. My heart didn't break. It fell. Quietly. Permanently. I opened the final video. Nancy _doing 7-08. Nancy was setting plates on the dining table, afternoon sunlight reflecting off the glassware. She smiled and chatted with Logan, who held a wine glass from the bar. "Adeline? She's the broken toy my stupid son picked. Pretty but useless. An English teacher? What kind of job is that? She's only here because no one else wants the responsibility. If I were her, I'd have left this town a long time ago." "And left the house to you," Logan added with a grin. "Exactly. She doesn't realize she's just keeping the seat warm." The video ended, but their laughter echoed in my mind. Not once did they speak of Walter as a human being. To them, he was an asset, a thing, a name on a deed to be shifted, sold, exploited. And I was the leftover shadow. I turned to Walter. No tears fell, but my throat tightened as if something invisible had wrapped around it. "You heard all of it?" He nodded slowly. "And you let them go on, because you wanted me to see the proof?" "Because you were the only one who stayed," he answered, voice gravelly but clear. I looked at the screen, still glowing. So many videos left to watch. But I understood enough. No more doubt. No more fog. They had strangled a man, and he had quietly gathered each piece of evidence like a soldier laying mines across enemy lines. I gently removed the USB and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. They thought Walter had faded away in silence. But he was waiting, for the right person to rise with him. And now I was ready. I sat across from Walter in the pale afternoon light, his old recliner tilting slightly to the left as if to listen better. He didn't speak right away. Just watched me, his gaze reaching into places no one else ever had. Then he cleared his throat, the sound rough like it had to push through layers of dried memory. I started retraining my voice back in February, he said slowly, each word carved from stone. When Nancy began secretly calling attorneys about legal capacity, I knew my time was short. I stayed silent, letting him continue. Each morning when they left the house, I used to text reader. Practice simple words first, then built up to longer phrases. Recorded myself. Played it back. Lost my voice for 2 days once. But I didn't stop. Because if I didn't stand up in time, everything would turn to ash. He reached for the water pitcher beside him, pouring himself a small glass. The motion was slow but sure. I hadn't seen him do that by himself since the stroke. I faked the tremors, the clumsy hands, the confusion, until Nancy fully believed it. She stopped giving the meds on time, got careless, started arguing with Logan louder, more often, and let her real self slip. That's when you started recording? I asked. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the glass. I hid cameras inside the picture frames. One in the garage, one in the dining room. Microphones in the desk lamp. I was a wartime technician. I know how to hide what needs hiding. I exhaled slowly. Not out of surprise, but because I'd never imagined Walter had prepared so meticulously. I created the Prescott Legacy Foundation back in March, he continued. Transferred the principal accounts, the property, most of the company shares. Everything moved under the trust. I'm the grantor, but the sole heir is you. My eyes widened. Me. Walter smiled, faint but warm, like something long hidden finally stepping into the sun. Because you were the only one who didn't vanish when my family collapsed. You didn't wait for an invitation. You came out of loyalty, not gain. That's something Nancy and Logan will never understand. I bit my lip gently, trying to stop the lump rising in my throat. But why hasn't anything been filed yet? If the trust is already set up and signed, then why do they still have control? Walter stayed silent for a moment, then slowly pulled a folded, time-worn piece of paper from his pocket. He laid it on the table and slid it toward me. I unfolded it. It was a copy of a letter from the law firm Hastings Cole. The contents clearly stated, a petition to reassess the legal capacity of Mr. Walter Prescott with the intention of appointing a legal guardian, filed by Nancy Prescott, immediate family. Filing date, 2 weeks ago. They're trying to prove I'm no longer of sound mind, he said, voice steady as steel. If the court agrees, every signature I've made will be invalid. Every decision I've made, including the trust and the change of heir, will be voided. And then all the assets revert back to them. I froze, the paper growing heavier in my hands. So how much time do we have left? No official hearing date yet, Walter said. But Nancy won't wait. She's called her attorney twice last week. Logan's already quietly listing the lake house for sale. I looked at him, feeling everything slide out from under what little ground we had. What do we do now? Walter raised an eyebrow, the sharpness in his gaze returning, like he was still a commanding officer. You need to submit the full packet, including the revised will, the trust documentation, and proof you've been my sole caretaker for the past 4 years. Most importantly, you must be the one to speak with Halpern Marsh's attorney. I'm not allowed outside by doctor's orders. But you still have your freedom. I swallowed hard. Are you sure they'll believe me? Walter smiled, a smile weathered by storms. They'll believe you because everything is notarized, videotaped during signing, and Halpern himself was the witness. We have the evidence. The real question is, are you ready to stand up? I looked at him, my heart pulling me back to all those quiet afternoons sitting beside him in the hospital room, his hand cold in mine, not knowing if he could still feel. Now I knew. I nodded. I'll go. First thing in the morning. Walter didn't say anything else. He simply reached out and held my hand. His hand was thin, veined, lightly trembling, but still warm. And for the first time since losing Michael, I didn't feel alone. Walter had prepared everything. Now it was my turn to act. Not for revenge, but to reclaim what should never have been stolen, the dignity of a man once thought to be silently fading away. The next morning, I arrived at Harold Brenner's law office on the east side of town, A weathered wooden house with ivy creeping up the walls and a brass nameplate dulled by time. The door opened as soon as I reached for the handle, as if he already knew I'd be there right on time. Harold rose from behind his swivel chair, walked over and shook my hand. He wore a crisp white shirt with sleeves neatly rolled, reading glasses perched on his nose, eyes sharp but kind. "Adeline Carter," he said, voice deep and even. "Walter was right. You're the only one left who still thinks of him as a person." I opened my bag and pulled out the thick stack of documents. I brought everything. The revised will, trust paperwork, power of attorney, caregiving records, and the USB. It holds videos, audio recordings, photos. Enough to reconstruct the entire truth. Harold sat down and nodded. "Good. I want everything done by the book. Airtight. No room for them to twist anything." I felt a flicker of relief. Just a flicker. Because I knew this was only the beginning. He opened his computer and looked up Walter's legal capacity file. "No ruling from the court yet. That's our opening. I'll immediately file a motion to reinstate Walter's legal capacity, with a psychiatric evaluation and a video clip of him speaking clearly. We'll need a second medical expert to verify, but I know someone." "What about Nancy?" I asked, my voice dipping. Harold didn't look up. He typed as he spoke. "I'll issue an emergency notice to the central bank where the family accounts are held. Under elder financial protection clauses, I can request a temporary freeze on all withdrawals, transfers, or liquidations, pending legal clarification. If they contest, I'll go straight to the judge." I clenched my jaw. "Logan's already trying to sell the Clear Lake house. I overheard him on a call." Harold stopped typing and turned to me. "Is that recording on the USB?" I nodded. "Then that's excellent. Once the assets are frozen, any illicit transactions can be tracked. I'll also send formal warnings to Logan and Nancy's attorneys. We'll notify them that their clients are under investigation for elder exploitation, asset manipulation, and could face criminal charges if they persist." I sat still, feeling the warm room grow heavier. Everything was moving fast. Less than 36 hours since Walter spoke his first word, and here I was, facing a family structure I thought I had long left behind. Harold looked at me. "Are you sure you want to go all the way with this? It won't be easy. Nancy will dig deep. She'll drag your background, your work, maybe even your personal life into this." I tightened my hands on my lap. "I teach high school literature. I make a modest living, have no debt, no scandal. The only thing they can fault me for is that I'm not one of their blood." Harold smiled. "Then you have more leverage than they think." He hit the print button. "This is the petition to restore capacity. You'll sign here as Walter's legal caregiver and key witness. Tonight I'll submit the full packet along with the USB to the court." I picked up the pen and signed. My hand didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. My name in blue ink on white paper. A full stop to the past and the first page of something new. Once all paperwork was complete, Harold handed me a copy of the will, the account freeze notice, and a list of assets under Walter's name that had been tampered with by Logan. I accepted them, tucking them carefully into my bag. "Tomorrow, I'll meet with the psychiatrist to arrange the certification. As for you," he looked at me, "go home and prepare yourself. They'll respond fast." I shook his hand again. "Thank you. Not just for helping, but for believing in Walter." "He's a soldier," Harold replied. "And the best ones never make a move without an exit plan. But what made me believe most was the way he looked when he talked about you. That kind of look, you can't fake it." Leaving Harold's office, I walked slowly down the stone-paved sidewalk. The sky was clear, the breeze gentle. I looked around at the wooden houses, the maple trees beginning to blush with red, and I thought of Walter, the man who stayed silent for 2 years just waiting for a single chance. And now he wasn't waiting anymore. We weren't waiting anymore. We had started to fight back. Not with shouting, but with precision, with truth captured in files, and with words that couldn't be denied. That evening, the house glowed with soft golden light. I rearranged the dining table, placed the laptop in the center, adjusted the camera to frame Walter's face just enough without revealing too much of the room. He was already dressed. A white shirt with pale blue stripes, buttoned all the way up like he was attending a hearing, not just a call. I sat beside him, the files neatly stacked. On top, the notarized will, the petition to restore legal capacity, and the official notice of elder asset investigation. Walter glanced at me, calm as ever. "Ready?" he asked softly. I nodded, then clicked to start the video call to Logan. The screen lit up. A few moments later, Logan's face appeared, slouched on a sofa, wrinkled t-shirt, beer in hand. Nancy sat behind him, draped in a fur coat, eyes still glued to her phone. Logan laughed when he saw Walter. "Well, look who's suddenly lucid today. You stopped taking your pills or something?" Nancy glanced up, then scowled. "Adeline, you planning to livestream a prayer circle or something? We don't have time for your fake sentimentality." I didn't respond right away. I simply opened the file folder, pulled out the notarized copy and held it up to the camera. My voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a soft gavel tap on a wooden bench. "I'm reading this in legal language as officially certified. On March 18th, Mr. Walter H. Prescott, in full mental capacity, signed and notarized an amended will declaring the complete revocation of all prior inheritance rights of Mrs. Nancy Prescott and Mr. Logan Prescott, due to acts of abandonment, manipulation, and personal gain at the expense of his medical condition." Nancy lunged forward. "What? That's a fake. My lawyer." "I'm not finished," I cut in, keeping my eyes locked on the screen. "Simultaneously, Mr. Prescott transferred all assets, including real estate holdings, business shares, and retirement accounts, into an independent trust titled the Prescott Legacy Foundation, with myself, Adeline Carter, as the sole designated trustee." Logan jumped up, slammed his beer glass on the table, his face turning red. "You're joking, right? You think you can steal everything from us with a stack of stupid papers?" Walter leaned slightly forward, his spine straightening like he was once again facing a battlefield map. "I've stood in war zones where they used bombs instead of words," he said slowly. "And I learned how to look the enemy straight in the eye. You two are no different." Nancy slammed her hand on the table. "I'm your wife, Walter. I've been by your side your whole life." "You were by my side," he replied without blinking, "but not for me. You stayed for the wealth I built. And when I fell, you were the first to count every dollar, not every pill." Logan sneered. She's not even family. The court will laugh in her face." "And I replied, "have prepared everything. I have proof of continuous caregiving, audio recordings of abusive conduct, and a signed petition to reinstate Mr. Prescott's legal capacity. You can laugh, but you can't erase the truth." Nancy snapped. "Adeline, you have no blood ties to this family. You're just a smudge on the Prescott legacy." I didn't blink. Maybe I don't carry the Prescott name, but I'm the one who did the dishes, mixed the meds, changed the sheets, and stayed up through nights while the only person who still called me family lay there alone. Blood relatives didn't do that. I did. Logan squinted. "You're just a high school English teacher." "I teach people to understand the value of words," I said. "You use words to hide the truth. That's the biggest difference between us." Walter turned toward me and gave a slight nod. Then he looked directly into the camera. "And one more thing," he said, voice tightening. "I've submitted formal notice to your attorneys initiating investigation for elder abuse, signature fraud, and asset misappropriation. All of my accounts are now frozen. Every transaction is under review." Nancy and Logan froze for a few seconds. Then Nancy shot up. "This won't hold. We'll drag you down, Adeline. You'll regret crossing bloodlines." Walter lowered his voice. "Don't threaten me with blood. I've seen blood spill on battlefields. And I know, it doesn't define family. Actions do." I ended the call just as Nancy began shrieking something about her attorney. The screen went black, but the air around me still pulsed with the echo of what had been said. I turned to Walter. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, then exhaled deeply. I knew he had held those words inside for a long time. And now they were finally spoken. Not in anger but in clarity, something they had tried so hard to bury. The scariest thing to manipulators is when truth learns to speak. That morning, courtroom number 3 was bathed in pale light from the towering window panes above. Aged oak in rich reddish brown wrapped around the solemn space, swallowing every sound into its weighty silence. I sat beside Harold at the left side table, a thick folder in front of us, the USB's silver edge glinting inside the evidence tray. Walter sat just behind me, posture straight, eyes steady on the front as if he had never been labeled incompetent for the past 2 years. Logan and Nancy were across from us. Nancy wore a pale fur coat and expensive silk scarf, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly every time she moved. Logan looked exhausted, hair greasy, his usual arrogance drained from his face. Their attorney, a salt-and-pepper-haired man, sat between them, fingers tightly interlocked with tension. Judge Mathers, a petite woman in her 60s with razor-sharp eyes, entered. The room rose. She gave a small nod and motioned for everyone to be seated. We begin with the petition to restore legal capacity for Mr. Walter H. Prescott, she said, voice crisp and economical. Mr. Harold Brenner, do you have evidence to present? Harold stood, reaching instinctively for the correct USB without looking. He spoke slowly, each word etched into the air. Your Honor, I present video and audio recordings collected over the past 3 months, created by Mr. Walter Prescott using personal devices, documenting violations of personal rights, financial manipulation, and elder abuse perpetrated by Mrs. Nancy Prescott and Mr. Logan Prescott. Additionally, I submit a medical evaluation certifying that Mr. Prescott was fully competent and able to make sound decisions at the time of the will amendment and asset transfer. He clicked play on the first video. The screen lit up with a kitchen scene, Nancy holding a wine glass, her voice cold and sharp. Just increase the dose. As long as he signs the damn paper. Doesn't need to be lucid. Just enough strength to hold a pen. A quiet gasp came from behind us. The opposing attorney froze. Nancy's face went pale, lips tightening. Logan glanced sideways at his mother, then dropped his gaze. Next came Logan's voice in the garage. I gave him the transfer draft. When the meds kicked in, he signed without reading. Easy as handing candy to a kid. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Harold paused the video and turned to the judge. We also have testimony from Nurse Myra Levin, who was dismissed for refusing to follow unlawful orders to increase medication doses. The courtroom door opened and Myra walked in. She wore a navy blue blouse, hair pulled back, eyes clear and unflinching as she took the witness stand. Her voice was steady, only slightly shaky at the start. I was instructed to increase lorazepam from 0.5 milligrams to 2 milligrams without any physician authorization. When I refused and documented everything, Mrs. Nancy Prescott called my employer and accused me of professional misconduct. My contract was terminated the following week. The judge nodded, then turned to Nancy. Mrs. Prescott, do you have a response? Nancy stood, voice quivering. That was because she didn't do her job. Walter needed peace. Every time he woke up, he was agitated, confused, didn't recognize anyone. He woke up because the dose had been lowered. Myra interjected even before the judge could ask. And when he was clear-headed, he started reading the documents Logan left lying around. He asked me, are they trying to take everything from me? I couldn't stay silent. Harold continued by submitting a signed statement from an independent doctor, a licensed psychiatrist, confirming that Walter was fully competent at the time he signed the asset transfer and revised will. Judge Mathers flipped through the documents, pausing at a blue folder bearing a notarized seal. She looked up and stared directly at Nancy and Logan. Based on the videos, witness testimonies, and the independent medical report, the court finds that Mr. Walter H. Prescott is currently of sound mind and fully capable of managing his own financial affairs. Therefore, this court hereby terminates the guardianship rights of Mrs. Nancy Prescott and suspends all her access to Mr. Prescott's financial accounts until the investigation is complete. I saw Nancy slump into her seat and Logan closed his eyes as if punched in the chest. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court is opening a formal criminal investigation into elder abuse, asset manipulation, and signature forgery related to unauthorized property transfer documents. The case will be submitted to the district attorney's office for prosecution next week. No one said a word. Only the steady clicks of the court clerk's pen echoed through the room, each one landing like a final punctuation mark. I looked at Walter. He wasn't smiling, but there was a wetness at the corner of his eyes. The light pouring in from the window behind him rested on his shoulders like a quiet spotlight. He looked like a stone statue come back to life, not by shouting but simply by truth and time. And today both had finally spoken for him. I stood when Judge Mathers read her final statement, her voice slicing through the cold courtroom air like steel. All assets belonging to Mr. Walter H. Prescott shall be legally transferred to the sole beneficiary Ms. Adeline Grace Carter, in accordance with the certified, competency-verified, and lawfully witnessed revised will. Logan shot to his feet as if slapped. No. This is fraud. We'll appeal, we'll sue this entire court. She's not family. His voice cracked, rising like a snapped violin string. Nancy let out a faint moan beside him, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed into her seat like a candle suddenly extinguished. Their attorney jumped up, catching her, fumbling to ask someone to call emergency services. A bailiff rushed out to call an ambulance. The courtroom held its breath, no one daring to move. I stood still. My heart was pounding, but not out of panic. Not out of triumph. But because at long last truth had been allowed to speak. Not by force, not through theatrics, but by simply standing firm. The judge tapped her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Walter remained seated behind me, silent. I turned and met his eyes. We didn't need to exchange words. The calm in his gaze had carried me through these 4 years, even when I feared he no longer felt anything at all. Outside, Logan was still shouting as Nancy was rolled into the ambulance. You people don't know who we are. She's just some broke schoolteacher, she tricked him. A police officer held him gently but firmly by the shoulder. I walked right past him. No glance. No reply. The rage of someone who lost his place because he didn't know how to protect it didn't move me in the slightest. A female reporter from the local news channel extended a microphone as I stepped down the courthouse steps. Ms. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public? This inheritance dispute has shaken the community. I paused briefly, looked straight into the lens. Family isn't the people who gave birth to you, I said calmly without hesitation. Family is the one who stays when everyone else walks away. I turned without waiting for another question. Every step on the marble echoed like the closing drumbeats of a war that had finally ended. Not a triumph built on revenge, but a quiet end to a life spent being invisible, treated like an outsider, an obstacle. When I opened the car door, Walter was already seated beside me, his gaze fixed ahead. I slid into the driver's seat and buckled up. Do you regret it? He asked after a few minutes of silence. I looked straight down the road into town. The breeze rustled the red maple trees on the shoulder. No, I answered. Because I never did anything wrong. I just stopped pretending everything was okay. He said nothing more. We drove past quiet houses, along roads I had traveled month after month to reach his home. But today, for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest. By late afternoon, we returned to the house where it all began. The 2-story brick home with faded shutters, where I used to pull weeds in the backyard. Walter stepped out on his own, leaning slightly on his cane. I followed behind and unlocked the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of peppermint, and the soft light filtered through the curtains like it always had. I went into the kitchen and poured 2 cups of tea. Walter sat at the dining table watching my every move. You don't need to say thank you, he said as I placed the cup before him. I know, I said softly. And you don't need to apologize for staying silent for so long. Your silence saved me from forgetting who I was. He nodded slowly, raised his cup, and tilted his head as if to toast without speaking. I clinked gently, then took a sip. Outside, the last light of day faded. But inside me, something had just begun to shine. Not wealth, not victory, but the quiet certainty of having been chosen. And more importantly, of being kept. That evening, Walter and I sat together on the porch steps, listening to the maple leaves scraping across the walkway. The sky was a pale blue, the color of early autumn, and the sun spilled like honey over the faded wooden fence. In my hands was the final draft of something we'd been building together over the last few weeks. The Prescott Foundation. Walter flipped through the pages slowly, glasses sliding down his nose. His eyes stopped at the mission statement. Legal aid, temporary housing, and trauma counseling for individuals abandoned, financially manipulated, or psychologically abused by their own families. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, clear, steady, but not fragile. Do you think the name is enough? I smiled, light as a breeze. The name doesn't matter as much as how we live with it. Walter fell silent for a moment. He took a deep breath, then gently placed his hand on the edge of the file. Do you know why I didn't choose a name that carried your last name? I shook my head. Because you never needed a name to belong, he replied. You stayed when no one else did. And to me, that means more than any title on a piece of paper. I didn't say anything. I just looked out at the front yard where I had just placed an old wooden chair. I found it in the shed, covered in dust and with one leg broken, but I fixed it. The pine wood was dry but sturdy, and after a fresh coat of ash gray paint, it looked like something that had weathered many storms. Not brand new, just strong enough to stay standing. I tied a small piece of fabric to the back of the chair, on which I had painted in white letters. For those who once forgot the way home. Walter leaned slightly to look at it and gave a slow nod. I used to think home was a place. But you made me see. Home is who waits when you return. I turned to him. I'm not perfect, Walter. I've been angry. I've stayed silent out of fear. But I never left. And maybe that's enough. He reached out and lightly touched the back of my hand. The gesture said more than any thank you. In the soft light of late afternoon, his hand, thin, veined, and aged, still carried the quiet strength of a man who once held a whole family together through nothing but honesty. In the days that followed, we began sending letters to community centers, churches, law offices, and even local health clinics. Each one contained an introduction to the Prescott Foundation, along with a handwritten note from him. If you've ever felt left behind by the very people who were supposed to love you most, this is a place to begin again. Not because we can change the past, but because you deserve a future that doesn't ask you to bow your head. We didn't host a grand opening. No banners, no champagne. Just a quiet Saturday morning when I opened the front door and dropped a stack of registration forms into the mailbox, then brewed 2 cups of cinnamon tea. The old wooden chair remained on the porch. Some days when it rained, I'd go out and cover it with a small tarp. Other days a passerby would pause, look at it, then keep walking. But one Sunday morning I saw a woman standing silently next to it. She wore a long beige coat, holding an old bag in her arms. Her eyes were puffy, her hair messy, but she stood tall. She didn't knock. She just sat on the chair, placed her hands on her lap, and stayed there for a long time, as if waiting for her breath to find its rhythm again. I poured an extra cup of tea and stepped outside. Would you like to come in for a while? I asked. The woman looked at me, her eyes red but warm. I don't know if I'm allowed. That chair is there for people who don't know, I said with a smile. Just sitting down is enough. She nodded, clutching the strap of her bag. And when I led her inside, Walter was already waiting at the dining table like a patient host. No one asked her about her past. We only asked, would you like to rest for a while? That evening, after walking her out, I returned to the porch and sat in the chair. Walter brought out a thin blanket and draped it over my shoulders. We didn't speak for 10 whole minutes. Only when the sky had darkened did he whisper from behind me, "You've made this house a home again." I took his hand and placed it gently on my lap. Not because I'm perfect, just because I never left. And in that cool autumn night where the kitchen light cast a small warm glow onto the porch, I felt my heart, though once fractured, still whole enough to hold space for those who never had a place to come back to. Have you ever seen someone treated like they didn't exist in their own home? Or wondered if your quiet presence carried enough weight to be called family? My story isn't about money or revenge. It's about someone who stayed when everyone else turned away. What do you think of Walter's decision to pass everything on, not to a blood relative but to the one who stayed quietly and faithfully? If you've ever gone through something similar, or if there's someone in your life who makes you feel like you belong, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your story, because sometimes just one voice can help someone else feel a little less alone. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, real, gentle, but powerful enough to stir the heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are still so many pieces of family life waiting to be told, and who knows, one of them might just feel more like yours than you expect.